Welcome to Grace Christian Family Center in Tomball, Texas. This is God in My Journey, and tonight's story is Chris Barton.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Barton. I am 51 years old. I've been married to my wife for 29 years, and she is an amazing woman. We have a daughter. She's fixing to turn 21, and she's an amazing young lady. We figured out my health wasn't right when I was 39 years old. I was always working. I was working on everything I had, and I had a lot of irons in the fire. And I felt like when I'd walk small distances, I would get winded. I couldn't walk long distance. I couldn't take deep breaths. I remember Friday night, our daughter was 9 years old, and we had movie night. And my daughter makes popcorn. My daughter makes amazing popcorn. So she crawled in the bed, and I went to get in the bed, and I missed the bed, and I hit the floor. My daughter started screaming, "Mom, Mom," and they took me to the hospital. I went to the emergency room, and they started testing and testing and testing and testing. They put an IV in my arm, and they put diuretics in there, and I started urinating and urinating and urinating. And for the first hour to 2 hours, I lost 8 pounds. I could breathe again. The cardiologist came in, and he said, "We figured it out. The aortic valve, which is a 3-valve chamber or valve, one of my valves was closed." So he said, it's a big deal, but it's not a big deal. You have to go to downtown Houston, and you're going to have open heart surgery, and they're going to replace the aortic valve with a mechanical valve. Okay? So when I was 39 years old, the first time I had open heart surgery, I went through the surgery. They replaced the aortic valve with a mechanical valve. And the next day when I was coherent, the cardiologist came in. I remember seeing him walked in the door, and I looked at him, and he was shaking his head. And he said, "Well, we replaced the valve, but," he said, you've got a more severe issue. He said, "Your heart is the biggest heart he's ever seen." He said, "Evidently that valve has been closed most of your life. So every time your heart rate got bigger and bigger and bigger, my heart got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it lost its elasticity." The man said, "A normal ejection fraction should be 55 to 65. He said, "At that time, your ejection fraction is 22 to 24. You have congested heart failure, and eventually you're going to need a heart transplant." So they put a pacemaker and a defibrillator in my chest, and they sent me to the house, and they said, keep me posted. They gave me a lot of medications. I was fine for about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, and we figured I was in the same position. I couldn't walk. I got winded very easy. We had a specialist cardiologist was downtown Houston, and we went down, and they said, "We're going to give you multiple tests. They're going to have an echo on the heart, and if the ejection fraction is below 20, hopefully you can get on the heart transplant list." So they did the echo, and they said, "Yes, you definitely need to take the test, and you're going to have 2 to 3 days worth of test, and hopefully we'll get no other major health issues, and hopefully you can get on the heart transplant list." So for 2 and 3 days, it was test after test after test after test. They did bone density. They took 24 vials of blood. They did just multiple tests. And at that time, the heart coordinator, now the heart coordinator, you have a pre-surgery and a post-surgery heart coordinator. The heart coordinator called us and said, "Okay, be prepared, come down. We can get you instated on the heart transplant list. We've got some good news, and we've got some not so good news. But be prepared, you're going to have a minor surgery." So I went down, and they said, "Well, you can get on the list, and you will be a B patient. They're going to put a tube under my armpit, and it was going to go down to my heart, and they were going to give me a backpack, and it had batteries and medication, and that would feed the medication." And he said, "Hopefully you can stay at the house, and hopefully we'll find a heart, and I'll call you, and you can come down and get the surgery." He said, "The not so good news is your blood is somewhat rare." He said, a normal diameter for a heart was 2,000 miles, but your blood was somewhat rare. The diameter was only 550 miles. Okay. So I went to the house. Now, most of my life I've been a Christian, but I really needed God. So I started praying every day. Lord, I want to get through this process. I want to watch my daughter grow up, and I want to watch my daughter marry a strong Christian. That was my prayer every day. About 2 weeks after that, a good friend of mine, Tom Mayhew. Now, Tom and Teresa Mayhew, they are mentors to me. Mr. Mayhew just turned 84. He called me. Now, they are Christian warriors. They are devout Christians. They don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk. Mr. Mayhew called me, and he said, you need to meet me in Hempstead tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. We're going to go fishing at Smithfield. Mr. Mayhew, I don't think I can. I'm on this list, and I can't. He said, son, you need to meet me in Hempstead tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. God gave me this message, and I needed to relay this message to you. Yes, sir. So I met Mr. Mayhew in Hempstead at 5 o'clock in the morning, jumped in the truck, and he said, now, I can't tell you till we make that lake. And he started making small talk, and we talked, and we talked, and we talked, and we talked, and he unloaded that boat, and he went in the middle of that lake. He shut that motor down. He said, Chris, listen to me and listen to me close. God told me you're going to get through this, and you're going to be outstanding. I was overwhelmed. Thank you, Jesus. I said, Mr. Mayhew, is that exactly what God told you? He said, I'm going to tell you again. God told me you're going to get through this, and you're going to be outstanding. Thank you, Jesus. I had no shadow of a doubt I was not going to go get through that. About a week, or maybe 2 weeks, the pump wasn't working. So we called the heart coordinator, and the heart coordinator said, come on down and be prepared. We may have to go ahead and admit you into the hospital. So I went down there. My mom, I call my mom Mama Bear. My mom she is a tough mom. I have 2 biological brothers and 3 adopted brothers and sisters, and my mom she's a heck of a mom. If you're a mom, you understand what I'm talking about. My mom stayed with me. I was in the hospital for 5.5 months. My mom came down and stayed Monday through Friday almost every week. And the weekends, my wife came, and everybody stayed with me 24/7. We went down. They said, yes, we need to go ahead and admit you into the hospital. You will be in intensive care. But they're going to put a swan through our neck. And you go from a B patient to an A patient. So the first heart that is available in that diameter, you're going to get it. Okay, God's got it. So the hospital at first was an amazing place. The nurses, the staff, they were just incredible people. They did small things for me that just inspired me. I mean, they took very good care of us. The best time of the day was we had heart monitors, and we had mobile monitors. So we would hook up to the monitors, and we call them Christmas trees. We had medications in our neck and in our arms and all of our chest, but we would walk, and we could walk down the hall. And that's where I met other patients. That was the best time of the day. That's where we got our sanity. So the best thing was to walk, and I got an opportunity to meet several other patients who were there for the same reason I was there. One particular man, he lived in Louisiana. Him and his wife were strong Christians. Another gentleman, he was a pastor of a church in Pasadena. Him and his wife were incredible Christians. We walked together. We prayed for each other. We were right where we were supposed to be. On the 2nd, maybe 9th or 10th week, my wife and I were celebrating our 22nd anniversary. Some good friends of ours, Brian and Connie Tanner, they came up. Now, Brian and Connie Tanner, they're good friends of ours. They are Christians. Connie started Chris Crusaders. She set up 2 benefits for me, and she updated the Facebook post. I mean, Connie and Brian are just good people. They did a lot for me. But Brian and Connie showed up, and we were celebrating our anniversary, and we had a good day. We laughed, we joked, it was a good day. The Tanners had a hotel about 2 miles from the hospital. So they left, and my wife and I went to bed. I went to bed in the hospital bed. My wife slept against the window that was basically a couch. In the middle of the night, at that time, I did not realize, but it felt like lightning. It just hit me. And my wife heard me. I was in a fetal position. I couldn't speak. I couldn't sit up. I couldn't do anything. My wife heard me moaning, and my wife called the nurse. The nurse came in. The nurse looked at me, and she did a couple quick tests, and the nurse said, stroke, stroke. The other nurses came in. They tried to get me out of the room and take me to surgery, and they're trying to identify what was causing the stroke. Jenny got on the phone, and she called Connie, and Brian, and the Tanner showed up immediately. They were trying to prepare me for surgery, and the head nurse came into the room, and the head nurse was on the phone with the surgeon. So the head nurse handed the phone to Jenny, and the surgeon started saying, well, we want to get him in surgery. We need your approval. We cannot guarantee anything. And the head nurse grabbed Connie and said, Connie, you need to tell Chris yes, or need to tell Jenny yes. So Connie grabbed Jenny's arm, and Connie said, tell him yes. So Jenny said yes, and Jenny threw the phone. I got into surgery. The blood clot was in the back of my heart, and it actually came up to the back of my brain. It was not a minor surgery. It wasn't a minor stroke. It was a major stroke. When I got out of surgery, I was depleted. After about 6 or 8 hours, they started trying to figure out what did the stroke do to my body, and it was dramatic. They first realized I had gangrene in both my feet. The right foot was the worst. I remember I was very thirsty, and I couldn't really talk, and I said, thirsty, give me something to drink. No. You can't swallow. You can't swallow. So they started doing multiple tests, and they said, well, the kidneys are shut down. We put you on dialysis. So they did more tests, and the ejection fraction at that time was about 10 or 9, I don't know, but they said, Chris won't make it a couple days. We need to put a pump through the groin, and the pump will push the blood through the body, and you'll be confined to the bed, and we'll put you on dialysis. And at first they were going to cut off both my feet, then they said, well, the toes will fall off by themselves. So that's where I was. I couldn't sit up, I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything. For dialysis, they wheeled in this giant machine, and they put a port in my chest, and they plugged me in, and it took 4 hours, and they took the blood out, and they filtered through my body, and I was so tired, and it was so cold, and I said, can you do it for 2 hours? No, 4 hours, 4 hours. Okay. I felt like God left me there. That's not outstanding. I lost my mobility in just a couple weeks. I lost all my honor. I was just frustrated. I felt like God left me. I went from a good patient to a bad patient. About 3 weeks after that, the cardiologist came in and said, we've got another plan. We're going to schedule you for an LVAD. And an LVAD is basically an open heart surgery. They're going to attach the LVAD to the heart, and it's basically an artificial heart. And it will push the blood through the heart. The tube will come out through my stomach, and I'll have a battery, and they're going to let me out of the house. They said, you can get your mobility in maybe a year, possibly 2 years. Once you get your mobility back, hopefully you can come back and get out on the transplant list. Okay, I'll take it. I want out. I want to go home. Saturday night, the cardiologist came in 2 days before the surgery, and they said, we found a heart. So they got me into surgery. I was in for about 8 or 9 hours. I got out of the surgery. The heart was working fantastic, but I had gangrene in both my feet. I lost my mobility. My kidneys weren't working. After a couple days, they said, we need to try to get you out of the bed, but I had lost all my mobility. I couldn't do anything. I had one man on my left side, I had one man on my right side, and a woman behind me. She set me out of the bed, And I remember the first time I stepped on my right foot, it felt like I was stepping down nails. It was like, oh! And it was very tough. It was tough. And I started walking. Now, I had to walk 50 feet. And that took me a month. I couldn't get myself out of the bed. But they could stand me up, and they gave me a walker. And I could walk 50 feet. I made that 50 feet so I could make it to the house. So I made it to the house. I couldn't drive. I couldn't do anything. So somebody stayed with me. Somebody picked me up and took me to dialysis. I was frustrated. And I was sitting on the back porch, and I guess I was praying, but I wasn't praying. I was complaining to God. God, I don't understand this. I'm through this, but this isn't outstanding. This is not outstanding. My body is depleted. I just don't understand. So I walked in the house. That time my daughter was 12 or 13 years old. And she read this poem. She wrote this poem in English class. I'm going to read this poem to you. Never shall I forget that night, the first night after the stroke, which leads to a long struggle between life and death. Never shall I forget the smell of death that floated through the air. Never shall I forget my father's pale, cold face that was frozen in terror of what was going to happen next. Never shall I forget that life-changing moment in which my faith grew vastly. Never shall I forget the beeping, buzzing sounds of the monitors that will never stop. Never shall I forget that hope was almost lost during the foggy mist of it all. Never shall I forget these things that have forever grown my faith in God. Never. And I reread that last line again. Never shall I forget these things that have forever grown in faith in God. Never. That was God's second signal. I knew. See, my child, I would do anything for my child. I was ashamed. I was ashamed. I understood. So I got my composure. I went about my day. People picked me up, took me to dialysis. Not a big deal. I understood. About 2 weeks after that, they picked me up and they took me to dialysis, and they took in, and you sit in a seat, and I had a port in my chest, and they plugged me in, and the tech always took a vial of blood, and he goes back and he takes it to the lab, and he's always checking the blood, and the tech took a little longer than most times, and I thought, man, come on, you can't finish till you start. So the tech came back and he took a second vial of blood, and I said, what are you doing? What are you waiting for? Just wait, we'll be with you in a few minutes. So the kidney doctor walked in, and he reached down and he unplugged me. He said, your kidneys are working. That fantastic heart that's in your body is pushing the blood through the kidneys, and you don't have to stay on dialysis. Thank you, Jesus. I had to go to multiple doctor's appointments. And the medication was it was very high at first. My hands shaked. And I had doctor's appointments. I had to go to the skin doctor, and they would take my foot and they would scrape the dead skin off my foot. And I had doctor's appointments in downtown Houston, and they kept going back and forth. But I needed to get my sanity. I needed to get my mobility. I needed a project. So I bought an 82 short wheelbase Chevrolet truck, and that was my therapist. I would waddle out to my shop, and I would tinker on that truck. It took a long time, but I got it up and running. In the meantime, I was curious, where did this heart come from? And I did not know if it was a man. I didn't know if it was a woman. I didn't know who it was. So I talked to the hospital, and the hospital said, you can write a letter to the liaison, and the liaison will forward the letter to the family. Okay. So I wrote a letter to the family. I did not know who they were, and I gave a letter to the liaison. And I went back and I started tinkering on the truck, and I went back and forth to the doctor's appointment. I waited about a month and a half or 2 months later, and I called the liaison, and I said, have you heard from the family? And they said, yeah, well, I'll call the family and I'll call you back. So the liaison called me back and said, you're going to get a letter. Okay. So I received a letter a couple weeks, and I was overwhelmed. The young man who I have the heart in my body is Michael Donovan Reed. He was 23 years old. He was in the Air Force for 4 years, re-enlisted for another 4 years. He went through the chain really fast. He got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. That man was an amazing man. At first, I thought maybe that heart should have went somewhere else. Maybe somebody could use that heart and apply it in a better position than I was. So on the bottom of the letter, the mom, Lee, left her phone number. So I called her, and it was a very emotional phone conversation. In the conversation, I was so curious about Donovan. And I asked her, he was in the Air Force. And she said, yes, he was stationed in New Mexico. And he had an aneurysm. He was extremely healthy. And they life-flighted him from there to Lubbock, Texas. So after the conversation, I got off and I got on the internet and I looked between Lubbock, Texas and Houston, Texas. And Houston, Texas to Lubbock, Texas, 516 miles. So it was barely in that diameter. So I understood, I've got to do something. I've got to pay it forward. I've got this is the best second gift, the best first gift I got saved. The second gift was that heart, but I really needed to pay it forward. I needed to help people. And that's what I did. Now, I could not apply myself very much because my mobility was not very good. But I finished the truck and I sold that truck and I bought a 55 F100 and I remodeled that, I restored that, and I bought an 85 Monte Carlo Super Sport. But in that meantime, anybody who asked me to help me, I would help them. I would step up. If anybody would say, hey, can you help me with this? No problem. I would show up. And I couldn't do very much for very many people, but I would do whatever I could. And for whatever reason, I like older people. I understand that. I just like to listen. So a friend of mine called me about 3.5 years ago, and he's at a farm in Kansas. And he said, well, I need your help. I said, what do you need? He said, I bought 2 semis and a tractor at a farm auction, and I need your help to come move those equipment from that farm to this farm. And I said, how far is the farm? 160 miles. Okay. He said, what I'd really appreciate if you could get somebody to go with me. Okay. So I looked around. I called multiple people, and a friend of mine, Dickie Billick, and I said, Mr. Billick, you want to go to Kansas? I think I will. So Mr. Billick, he's quite a bit older than me. He owns a company called Sun Manufacturing. It's a gas and oil industry. It's a machine shop. So I picked up Mr. Billick, and we went to Kansas, and we had one heck of an adventure. The semis were mid-70s. They'd never been off that farm. We got it up, we got it running. We moved it from one farm to the next farm. It was an adventure. So we were coming back, and Mr. Billick said, hey, Chris, come work for me. I'm like, what? What can I do for you? And he said, well, I've got a lot of accounts, and they're big corporations, and I want you to come out and develop the relationship. Just go visit them. So I thought, wow, that'd be a good opportunity. I think I would. So I started working for Sun Manufacturing about 3.5 years ago. I was doing pretty good, and I was starting to get some traction, and my confidence is very, very low. The stroke, I get confused very easy driving, so I always keep things on maps, but I know that I am God's child, and I trust in God, and God directs my path. So I was getting a little traction. I felt, better, and then the COVID started, and the COVID shut everything down. You couldn't go see anything. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't do anything. So I was back to square one. So that weekend, I went to Buffalo, Texas. In Buffalo, Texas, a lot of my family lives up there. And I was up there that weekend, and that evening, I went back to the ranch. And the ranch, there's 2 bridges that my grandfather built over Buffalo Creek. And that first bridge is a favorite place to sit down and to pray. So I got on that bridge and I said, God, I don't know what you're going to open the door for me. I don't know which direction you're going to send me, but I know you're going to send me whatever direction you need me. And I trust you, God. So I went to the house, and I was at the house, and the next morning a good friend of mine, Greg Owens, called me. Now, Greg said, what are you doing? Now, Greg and Julie Owens, they own a franchise. Now, before I had a commercial dry cleaners, and they were an account, and I did a lot of fire and water restoration. Greg and Julie, they have been friends of ours for a long time. Greg called me, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm not doing anything. And I said, why are you calling me? He said, I want you to come work for me. So I started laughing. He said, why are you laughing? I said, Greg, I prayed yesterday, and you're calling me. And he laughed, and he said, God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? So I started working for him about 2.5 years ago, and I understand fire and water restoration. Their company, they've owned that company for over 20 years, so they're ingrained in that community. So there's 218 accounts, and I got that, and they gave me a Suburban, and off I went. And I enjoyed my job. I still enjoy my job. And I like small communities. I was doing pretty good. On the third month, Greg came to me and Greg said, hey, I need you to run the CE classes. And I'm like, Greg, I mean, you're my boss, but I don't think I can run the CE classes. CE classes are continuing education classes, and they're for 4 hours. All agents and adjusters in the state of Texas, they have to have 24 hours every 2 years to keep their certifications and their licenses. I'm like, Greg, I had a stroke, and I mean, I make a lot of mistakes talking, and it's a PowerPoint for 4 hours. And he said, not a big deal. So I immediately started praying, God, please give me a courteous audience. I know I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, but I know that you're going to give me a good audience, and I trust you, God. So the morning of the class was 10 o'clock, and all the agents and adjusters, the class was upstairs, and everybody was kind of walking up, and we were making small talk, and we were waiting for 10 o'clock, and the agents and adjusters were showing up, and we just started talking, and we were waiting, and I looked at the clock, and it was 10 o'clock, and I said, okay, I'm fixing to start the class, and I heard a man walking up, and the man was walking up, and he was walking up slow, donk, 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 donk. I can't tell you who the man is, but when he opened the back door, I immediately recognized him. This gentleman, his agency has been in his family for over 100 years. He has been grandfathered in for probably 20 or 30 years. He did not need to go to that CE class. But that gentleman, he had a pretty severe health issue. He struggles walking, and he struggles talking. So he sat in the back room, or the back row, and I said, it's good, I'm glad you showed up. And I started the class. And I said, in advance, I have to apologize. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. And the gentleman said, you can do it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I started running through the PowerPoint, and every time I struggled on a word, the man would say, they misprinted it. It was baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. About 3 or 4 months after that, Julie sent me an email, and they said, we have another franchise, and this franchise has a territory, and there is a military base in that territory. Now, we've owned that franchise for 20 years, and we've asked every salesman, every saleswoman to go out there and get a contract through that military base, and nobody have. Now, it's not an easy task, but I think you can. And I immediately started thinking about Donovan. I could not think of a better place than to pay it forward, be a military base. So I started praying and praying and praying and praying. I got on the internet and I tried to identify who are civilian contractors. How do you get a contract through the government? And I'm not very good on the internet, and I could not identify anything. So I walked into Julie's office and I said, Julie, I guess I just need to just drive up that base. And so she said, okay. She said, do you have a briefcase? I said, no. So she said, here's a satchel. So she gave me a satchel. She gave me the paperwork. I put it in the satchel, and the next morning I woke up early in the morning and I went to that base. Now, I walked into security, and I was nervous, but I was praying the whole way. When I walked in security, the gentleman on the right side, he was a big man, And I walked in and he said it very abruptly, "Grab a ticket and sit down." He scared me. And I looked to the left and there was a ticket dispenser. So I reached back and I was trying to pull a ticket down, and I'm a bull in a china cabinet. So I pulled the ticket and about 20 tickets went. So I looked back, I reached down, I was trying to pull the bottom ticket, and I pulled both bottom tickets. And I looked back, the man had his arms crossed. Oh boy. So I sat down and I waited, and I got that man. And he said, "What's your reason to come on that base?" And I said, "Well, we have a franchise in this territory, and I would like to get a contract through the government or civilian contractors." The man said, "You're a salesman?" Yes, sir. So he said, "We don't allow salesmen on the base, the COVID and all that, and you have to have a reason to go on that base." And I said, "Sir, at that time, 5 years ago, I received a heart transplant, and the young man was in the military. I want a contract." The man kind of looked at me funny. He said, "Give me your driver's license." So I gave him his driver's license, went back, and he came back, and he handed me my driver's license back, and he said, "You got a 30-day pass. Good luck to you, young man." Thank you, Jesus. So I walked in that Suburban, I drove on that base, and I was praying constantly. When I drove on that base, I identified at first, on the left side, there was a new hospital, and the right side was the old hospital, and it was a military base, and that was actually the headquarters, and it was an old hospital. So I thought, man, I can't go to the headquarters. Now, I'm naive, so I just assumed you just drive around and you see civilian contractors. But no, all military bases, they don't identify names. It's all numbers, 1248231. So I thought, ooh. I drove around and drove around. I remembered the headquarters was an old hospital. And I know all hospitals has a reception desk. So I thought, that's where I'm going to find somebody, right there behind that reception desk. So I got my satchel and I walked into headquarters, and there was a reception desk, but nobody was there. So I walked down the hall and I immediately identified that you could not walk in any office, you could not walk on any elevator. You had to have a passcode, a card, or a keypad. So I got nervous. So I got back in the Suburban and I was driving around, and I always wear my glasses for driving, and my glasses fell under the seat. So I reached down and I was picking up my glasses, and I looked up and I was driving off the base. So I was so frustrated. I pulled into a Walmart and I opened the Suburban, and I was praying really loud, "God, I really need your help. I need you to direct my path. Open the door, God, please." And I turned around, and there was an elderly man pushing a buggy, and the man looked at me and he said, "You seem crazy to me. You're talking to yourself." So I got back in the Suburban, I went back to headquarters, and I started walking up and down, up and down, up and down. And there was a map in the corner. And I was looking at the map, and it was just numbers. And the elderly woman walked up behind me, and she said, "Young man, do you need some help?" And I turned around, and she was the only other woman who had civilian clothes other than me in that headquarters. "Yes, ma'am, I do." "Do you know who's over the maintenance of the facility?" "Well, yeah, they're in the basement." "Well, I can't get on the elevator." "Go right through that door and go to the stairwell." "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Enjoy this day." So I went down the stairwell and I introduced myself, and they were very polite, and they said, "Well, my boss is on the 3rd floor. Let me call him." So he called the gentleman. He said, "Yeah, bring him up." So I came up. They opened the door, and the gentleman met me in front of the office. He said, "Come on in." So I walked in his office. Now, as a salesman, I always look around. I try to identify what people are into. If there's a deer head on the wall, he's a hunter. If there's pictures of kids, then he's a father. And I looked around his office, and on the left side of his desk, it looked like a Bible. And so I started the conversation, and I said, "I've got a question for you." And I said, "What's your question?" And I said, "Well, you're reading the Bible." And he laughed, and he said, "No, I wasn't." And he said, "This is the terms." He said, "I am a contract specialist, and I develop the contracts, but we have to be very specific around these terms, and this is what this is for." And I said, "Okay." And he reached under his desk, and he said, "Now, this is the Bible, and I read this every day." Okay. So we started talking, and we started talking, and we started talking, and I was there for about an hour and a half. Before I left, the gentleman said, "Give me all your business cards. I'm going to get all the civilian contractors, I'm going to give you your business cards, and you'll get a call sooner than later. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, we got our first job, and it wasn't a big job. And then about 6 months later, we got a big job. The reason I'm telling you about these chapters is, if you remember what Tom Mayhew told me at that lake, he said, young man, you're going to get through this, and you're going to be outstanding. My life is outstanding. I'm not a good salesman. I'm not a good salesman. But I am God's child. And it's not in my time. It's in God's time. I am so humble and I'm so thankful. Thank you.